The word amortize really means, in its simplest form, to spread out. You amortize something, you're spreading it out. And with a loan, the balance is going down. Someone says, well, how many years does it take to amortize that loan? You know what they're saying is, how many years does it take to pay off that loan? Okay. Now, I'll tell you a real quick story. Back when I was in college, I was getting close to finishing my bachelor's degree back in the late 70s. And back in those days, we didn't have all these fancy computers and all this stuff that could do all this stuff for you, and you didn't have to think about it. You had to calculate this stuff using these formulas and these tables. And then Texas Instruments came out with the first calculator that would do this for you. Time value of money. Calculate the payment, all this stuff. And I had to have one. It was a very expensive calculator. So I went to the university bookstore where I was going to college, and they just got one in, brand new, just got one in, and I bought it. First one they ever sold was me. I just had to have it. Kind of like your cell phone today. Had to have me a calculator that could calculate all this stuff. Because in accounting we use this a lot. And then I decided I needed to buy a new car a few months later. And I went to the car dealership to buy this car. And this is back in the days when I had to make monthly payments on cars, so I was having to negotiate the deal and the payment. So I picked out the car, and the guy was trying to say, well, let me tell you about your payment. I said, I don't want to know about my payment. I want to know how much money I'm borrowing on this car. Let me tell you about your payment. I don't want to know about that. So finally, we agreed on a price, and I knew how much money I was going to pay, but I wasn't real sure I was going to buy this car yet. He says, well, we'll need to figure your payment on this loan, on your loan. I'll go back and talk to the finance manager about it. I said, you don't need to. I can handle it. Whipped out this calculator, punched in these buttons, boom, I had the payment, and I thought the guy was going to pass out. He said, how'd you do that? That can't be right. That can't be right. That's fine. Go talk to your finance manager. And they both came out. One of them was still kind of white, and the other one came out and said, how'd you know how to do that? I said, I'm smart. And I said, I don't want this car anymore. I'm leaving. Wait a minute. Let's talk about this. I never in my life made a better deal on a car than I did that day. They won't give me the darn thing almost. What's the moral of the story? And it's a true story. Moral of the story is, folks, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Let me put it to you this way. What I'm teaching you here is just a touch of the kind of stuff you need to know if you're going to be a knowledgeable business person. But how many of you like the idea of being at the mercy of a bank? Not me. How about the mercy of a car dealership? Well, you are if you don't know how this works. You're at their mercy. Well, whatever you say, they stick this contract in front of you. You don't read it. You sign it. God knows what you just signed. Knowledge is power. The more you know about this stuff, the less likely you're going to get taken advantage of sometime in your life. But if you don't understand it, you're going to get taken advantage of. You're going to get taken advantage of. And I don't want that to happen to you. Now, I'm not here to teach you all there is to know about the time value of money. But I strongly suggest that as you go through school, especially if you go on to a four-year institution, that you make sure you learn this concept. And if you're going to be in business, you will, because it's a big deal in business. It's a very big deal. If you're an accounting major, it's a really big deal. Now, all right, I want you to look up here at this slide, and this slide is on page 434, okay? this is a very important slide because this is what your exam's going to be like, okay? So let me tell you there on the front end, your homework is like this and your exam is like this, okay? This is called an amortization table. Now you need to see how this works because you're going to have to do it. First thing you got to do is figure out the payment. You divide your present value, your loan, by the B3 factor. That gives you your payment. Look right here, everybody. Was this not a 3-year payment? 1, 2, 3, right? See it on the screen? 1, 2, 3. The payment's $23,282, correct? Now here's the question. How much of that is principal and how much of that is interest? Well, here's what you got to know. Folks, how much was that? What was the principal balance of that loan for the whole period, for the whole year? $60,000. What is 8% of $60,000? You paying $4,800 of interest on that $60,000 for a year. Are you with me? Now, what's your total payment? $23,282, right? The interest is in there. So how are you going to get the principal reduction part? The principal reduction part. You're going to take that payment that you computed. You're going to take that payment. You're going to subtract out your interest, and what's left is your principal component, is it not? Now, again, how do you get your interest? It's your principal amount for the beginning of the period times the interest rate in effect for that period. What was the beginning balance of the loan at the beginning of the year? $60,000. What's the interest rate? 8%. So how much interest on that loan for that year? Now subtract that from your payment, and that's your principal reduction. What happens to your principal? It goes from 60 minus 418,482 goes down to what? 41,518. 41,518 is going to be outstanding for a full year now, is it not? Multiply it times what? 0.08, right? That gives you your new interest for the second year. Now notice the interest is less. Doesn't that make sense? Yes. You owe less money for that second year, right? So the principal part is more. Subtract the 3321 from the 23,282 and you get 19,961. You've got to reduce that 41,518 by that 19,000. It goes down to 21,557. How much interest on the third year on 21,557? 8%. That's 1725. Subtract that from 23,282, you get 21,557. What's the loan balance? 21,557, right? So the loan is now amortized to what? 0. Now, let me caution you. If you do this and you round all the numbers, it's not going to work out perfectly. This number right here, that balance is 21,557. That interest amount probably is 1726 or 1724. It's going to be off $1 or $2 because of rounding. In an amortization schedule you see in the real world, it had dollars and what? Dollars and cents. Okay. But in a textbook, if they round it, you're going to have, this ends up being a plug number because of rounding. Okay? So if you went to do this on your calculator, you may get a number that's slightly different because of rounding. Okay? Now, folks, that's what you got to be able to do on your test and in your homework, okay? The problem you need to make sure you can do for chapter 10 for this is problem 10-6A. 10-6A. Do not take your test, your exam, until you've done that problem thoroughly. All right? We're going to look at it here in a minute. We're going to look at it in just a minute. Now, folks, I want to put in journal entry format the first payment. Now, you should be able to do this with your knowledge at this time. Let's do it together without looking at the slide. How much am I going to pay for my first payment? Somebody tell me.
$23,282.
$23,282. I'm going to credit cash 23,282, am I not? Agree? Now how much of that's interest?
48.
So 1231.18, I'm going to debit interest what? Expense, because that's what it's costing me to borrow this money. Interest expense. Now what am I going to do? I've got a note payable up here on my ledger for $60,000. What am I going to do? I'm going to debit what? I want that note to go down, so what am I going to do? Debit what? Debits notes payable. Debit notes payable. How much? Well, how much does it tell you? 18 what? 482. Are you with me? So what does that do to this loan here? It brings it down 18,482. It brings it down to 41,518. Right? You with me? Now what's your second payment going to be? Your second payment's going to be just like the first payment. You're going to have a credit to cash for the full amount, right? But your interest expense and your note payable will not be these two numbers. It'll be these two numbers, will it not? And your third payment will be the same credit to cash, will it not? Cash going what? God, folks, cash is an asset and it's going what? Down. We credit it, right? And we're going to debit the note for 21,557, and we're going to debit the interest expense for 1725. Are you with me? The only thing that is slightly difficult about it is what happens if the note was taken out, say, in October, and you don't have to pay your first payment to the end of September of the next year. What happens? You go from 1 year to what? Another year, right? So you've got that adjustment thingy there, don't you? Right? We'll put that on the board in just a minute. So there it is. Debit interest expense, debit notes payable, credit cash. Debit interest expense, credit notes payable, debit cash. Right? Are you with me? You're going to have to do that. Okay. Let's very quickly look at this example. On January 1, 2000, X1, a company borrows $1,000 cash by signing a 4-year 5% installment note. The note requires 4 equal total payments of interest and principal on December 31st of each year. What's the payment going to be, everybody? You tell me. Find that table B3 and tell me what the payment is going to be. Here, I'll put it on the board. There's the table. Somebody tell me what factor. It's 4 years at 5%, isn't it? Is that right? So I got a $1,000 note, 4 years at 5%. Here's my 5% column, right? And there's my 4, correct? 3.5460, correct? If I divide that out, I'm going to get my payment. Now they're going to round it to the nearest dollar, and I think it's $282. Now that ought to make sense to you. 4 payments, if it was no interest, would be $250, wouldn't it? So it's a little more because of the interest, right? Okay. Now look at your amortization table here. Let's make sure we can do this, and then we're going to look at one more. Everybody, what was my beginning balance of the note? 1,000. What was the rate? 5% of 1,000 is $50. So how much of this 282 cash credit payment is principal? 282 minus 50 is 232, right? Then we take our $1,000 balance and we subtract 232 from it. On our ledger, we're going to be debiting the note. So the note balance is going down by 232, right? So what's my new balance? 768. 768 times what rate? $38. So 38 of that 282 is interest and 244 is principal. Have I lost you? Okay. Now, if we take that 768, which was our previous balance, and we reduce it by 244, we get what balance? 524. 524 is my new balance. 5%, $26. 282 is my payment. So 26 interest, 256 if I subtract must be principal, right? 256 comes off the what? The 524, and that gives me a new balance of 268, right? 268 times 5%, let's say it's 14. 14 from 282 is 268. What's my balance now? Yeah. Now, what's this mean to balance? Probably because of rounding, that was 13 or 15, okay? So you got to get the balance to what here? Zero. Does this sound familiar? Double defining balance depreciation when we plugged it, right? 268. So whatever your interest is going to be the amount you need to balance because of rounding. Are you with me? Folks, we paid $1,128. How much we borrowed? 1,000. So how much interest was on this loan? 128, right? Are you with me? Okay. There's the journal entries. Look at the journal entries. You're going to have to do the journal entries. When you borrowed the money, you debited cash and credited notes payable. Your note went up. Look at each transaction. Every one of them did what? Debit interest expense, debit notes payable, credit cash for 282, right? Where did these numbers come from? From that table, correct? Are you with me? Okay. Now, I want to do two more things and we're going to be done with this part of the discussion and then we're going to go to bonds. Okay? Let me get to it here. I want you, if you have a book, I want you to turn and find problem 6A, which is on page 455. 455. Now the nice thing about this problem is that you don't have to compute the payment, it just tells you what it is. Life is so easy. And you've got to do this problem in your homework. You're also going to have to do something similar to this on your exam. Everybody understand what I'm saying? So let's make sure we can do this problem. All right, let's read it together. I'm on page 455. On November 1st of 2018, now folks, this is I'm going to teach you two things here. Part of it has to do with the fact that this isn't at the first of the year. November 1st, 2018, Norwood borrows $200,000 cash from a bank by signing a 5-year installment note bearing 8% interest. The note requires equal payments of $50,091 each year on October 31st. Well, folks, without looking at the table, the way they got that number is that they took the $200,000, they looked on table D3 at 8% for 5 years, and they got that factor, 3.9927. What did they do then? They divided, did they not? And they got $50,091. Are you with me? All right, let's go through the amortization table very quickly. When did this loan, we've got to look at the date. What date was this loan? November the what? What year? 18. So when does the payment come due? October 31st of 2000 what? Now folks, you've got to think calendar here, okay? So that first payment is $200,000 principal. 10/31/19. That's a year later, isn't it? All of November through the next year, all of October. 1 year. We're going to take 8% times 200,000, and how much interest are we getting? 16. How much was the payment? 50,091. Subtract the 16,000 from the 50,091, there's my principal, correct? Now how do I get this new number, ending balance of principal? I'm going to take my 200 minus my principal reduction, correct? That gives me 165,909. Now that loan's going to be outstanding, that amount's going to be outstanding for a whole year. So you get 165,909 times 8%, 13,273, right? Subtract that from my 50,091, and how much principal do I get? 36,818, correct? Then from that 165, I'm going to subtract that 36,818, am I not? Which will give me now 129,091, correct? Come over here in year 3. Multiply that times 8, I get 10,327. I subtract that from the 50,091, I get a principal reduction of 39,764. Which means that balance there is going to go down by that amount and give me 89,327. Are you with me? Now you're going to have to sit down and do this, folks. I can stand up here and point things with the green pointer all the time. You're going to have to sit down and do it with a calculator. Okay. Fourth year, 89,327 times 8% gives me 7,146. Subtract that from my payment, I get a balance of 42,945. Okay. Reduction. So I subtract that from the 89,327, I get 46,382. 46,382 times 8% will give me something close to 3709. But remember, I got to get this thing to go to what? 0. So I've got to have a 46,382 here, right? This might be $1 or $2 off. Kind of have to plug it. Make sense? You're going to have to do that. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to show you is the hardest part, and it shouldn't be that hard to you. I want to talk to you about making this first payment here. You got to think about what I've taught you over and over again. Financial statements. We're assuming in these last chapters that our financial statements are being done once a year. When was this note dated? November what? 2000 what? Now, when are we going to prepare our financial statements? December 31st, 2018, right? This note's been outstanding, has it not? We've been using their money, right? Has any interest added up on this note? Yes. So we have got to make an adjustment. You're going to have to do this, everybody. You with me? You're going to have to do this. I'm going to debit interest what? Expense. And credit what? Interest payable. We've seen this in these last two chapters, have we not? So how much was my loan balance, everybody? $200,000. Now, you can do this either with days or with months. It doesn't matter. In this case, it's going to give you the same answer. How many days have passed? 29 and 31, that's 60, right? That's going to give me rounded 2667. Or you could use 2/12, same fraction. Okay, 2 months, okay? And that's the same way it would probably be on the test. So 2667. But now, folks, when do we pay this thing? We pay this thing on October what? 31st. Of 2019, agreed? How much cash am I going to pay? Well, that comes from right there. My payment is $50,091, agreed? $50,091. I think I've got the thing cut off here. Okay. How much of that is principal, everybody?
$34.91.
So I'm going to debit notes payable for that $34,091. What is the problem, though? The interest expense, part of it was up in 2018, right? And the rest of it is in 2019, right? You with me? So this payment down here includes this $2667 that was a payable at the end of last year, correct? So I'm going to debit interest what? Interest payable for how much? 2667, right? Now that goes to zero, right? That's paid. And what's left? What's left is 13,000 what? 333, and that's interest expense for what? 10 months, is it not? So I've got interest expense for 2019 of 13,333. We did that in chapter 7 with receivables. We did that in chapter 9 with current notes payable, and we've done it again in chapter 10 with long-term notes payable. So you're going to have to do that. Are you with me? Now the last thing I want to show you here is this. Look over here at the board. Right here under current liabilities, I keep putting this on here. Current portion of long-term debt. Folks, does some part of this loan not come due in the next year?
Yes.
What I want to ask you is this. What would show up on my balance sheet at December 31st, 2018? Look up there and tell me how much principal balance is going to be paid within the next year. Let me stop and say this. Folks, the note payable and the current portion of long-term debt, that's just principal. Why? Because the interest is a separate thing. When we talk about these two numbers, we're talking about principal. The interest is right there, interest payable. It's separate, it's by itself, okay? So I'm asking this question. Look at that table and tell me how much principal is coming due in the next year. The date is December 31st, 2018. How much principal is coming due in the next year? How much? No, that's the cash. How much principal? How much principal? Not how much cash, but how much principal only. It's the payment, 34091, right? One payment's going to be made when? In October. And how much principal's in that payment? 34091. So folks, the current portion of long-term debt is 34091. And what else do we have? We have interest payable, which is one of those accrued liabilities of how much? So how much do we owe in the next year? We owe 34091 plus 2667, right? All right. As of December 31st. Then we're going to owe the 13,333 as what? Time passes, right? Which means another 10 months, correct? But as of December 31st, how much do we owe in the next year? We owe principal of how much? And as of December 31st, we owe 2667, right, in interest. But now by October, will we not owe more interest? To the tune of $13,333 more dollars, right? How much would be long-term debt then? You'd have to add up, actually it's the 129,091. If you add up these four numbers, I owe 129,091. That would be my long-term debt as adjusted for this right here, fair value, which gets into the time value of money, which is beyond the scope of this course. All right? So that's how that works. Okay? Current portion of long-term debt. How much principal is due in the next year? That's what it's saying. Okay? Any questions? None? I go home every night and say, you know, to my wife, I am damn good. She just laughs at me. Just laughs at me. But I must be. Nobody ever asked me any questions. All right. That's what you need to know. Now, I will tell you that this problem that we're looking at here, this is going to be what's on your test, okay? The second part of tonight's discussion about bonds, most of what we're going to be on your test is going to be concepts about bonds, not so much problems. Okay? All right, everybody. What we're going to do right now is take our 10-minute break a little early. So let's take a break now. I'll be back with the big hands between the 10 and the 11, okay? And then we'll get started on bonds.
That's when that took, I was on the first took 2 days.
Yeah. You want me to?
I got to pick it up this night.
I don't really know what it says. I always work in I don't know, 7
I don't remember, she told me to do
I know it's me.
That's the first problem. Go ahead.
I don't know. It was something somebody posted. It says, I think this, what they're saying is pretty relevant, I just want to hear what that say. It says if your original creditor sold your debt to a collections agency, they also wrote off your debt on their taxes and wrote off your obligations to pay. You could dispute the transaction via dispute.transunion.com along with any other collection agency owed items listed on your report. You can dispute reason is contract was canceled and write no contract in the dispute comments. I list thousands off my own report and have been working to help my family and friends do the same.
They're trying to get you to buy their services. The answer to that is most of that's not correct, because when you sell your, understand, when a creditor sells a loan to a collection agency, it's either with or without recourse. And if it's with recourse, what they're talking about, which is most of them are, what they're talking about there is not true. But even if you sold it without recourse, when you write it off, your books has no bearing on whether or not you have a valid obligation against them. Okay? So, believe me, there's a statute of limitations, all right? The statute of limitations says how long they can collect a debt, all right? And until that statute runs, in most cases, that debt's not invalid, all right? And it has more bearing to do with what you signed when you agree to that debt. And if you ever go and read what you signed, all those loans are designed, all those loan documents are designed to protect the lender, not to protect you. So there might be a tinge of truth to that, but most of that's not right. And keep in mind, even if that happens, then who steps in the shoes of the lender? The collection agency. So they have all the rights and privileges of the lender. And so, okay, so you don't owe the lender. You owe the collection agency. They have all the rights and privileges of the lender. And so, yeah, you don't owe them, you owe them. Too bad. And you'd probably sign a document that says you agree to that. Which nobody reads. Right. If it sounds too good to be true, most of the time it is.
Oh, I'm new to this crap. I just want that.
Most time you see that stuff, they're trying to sell you, they want you to contact them so they can will represent you or something like that. That's what I mean. You want to be at the mercy of these people.
Do you think I could use future cost and present cost and try to get a good deal on a car if I paid in cash?
Well, I mean, the same concepts are there at play, but there's a lot going on in a car dealer, with a car dealer. Number one, if you got a trade-in, but then you got to understand that the people that are lending you the money are usually not the car dealership. So how much leverage you might have with them depends on a lot of issues. It's really hard to say. Too many variables at play.
Mm.
But I will tell you this, the more you understand this, the better you will be at thinking through what's happening. All right? And you're not there yet, okay? It's going to take a while. But don't sleep through the time value of money lectures in college, okay? They're really kind of important. The hardest thing about the time value of money lectures in college is that most college professors can't teach it. The guy that I had teaching it to me, he was more confused than, I don't think I'd ever seen a professor so confused. It's that man. He stayed confused. Y'all really don't look like y'all have a lot of fun right now. Everybody's looking at their phones. You're getting ready to learn about bonds. You should be excited. If it's something you know anything about, the opportunity to learn new things. Okay, let's get started. Maybe you'll get to go home a few minutes early tonight if we can get going, okay? Folks, be sure you can do this, okay? This is something you're going to have to do. All right, everybody, put your cell phones up for a few minutes. Do me that favor. Now, we are discussing right now long-term debt. Okay? We've already talked a little bit about notes payable, installment notes that cover more than 1 year. Now we're going to talk about bonds. Folks, look at this equation. Assets equal liabilities plus stockholder equity. You see that? Liabilities, debt. Stockholders' equity, equity. Debt and equity. Now, what have I taught you over and over again? Assets is what you got. This side tells you where it came from, right? Folks, this is the investing side of the balance sheet, which will become very important to you in a couple of weeks. This is the investing side of the balance sheet. This is the financing side of the balance sheet. What does finance mean? What does the way we say it in East Tennessee, what does finance mean? You're going to finance something. What does that mean? How are you going to acquire it, right? How do you finance your assets? You can borrow, that's debt. You can get your assets from your owners, that's equity. Or you can profitably run your business and create the assets that way, right? That's also equity. So how do we finance a company's assets? Through debt or equity, right? One of the two. Either by borrowing, by getting from our owners, or by running our business at a profit which creates assets. All right? So what we're talking about is financing assets, property, plant, and equipment, natural resources, intangibles, financing assets with debt and equity. And when they talk about that, compare debt and equity financing. What they mean is borrowing on a long-term basis or selling stock and getting assets from owners so you can invest in property, plant, and equipment. Now, very quickly, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages? Well, we'll come back to that. So right now we're going to talk about bonds. We'll come back to that in a minute. I think I need to introduce you to this before we do that. Folks, you have heard of bonds, have you not? Stocks and bonds, right? Now, how have you heard of that? You've primarily heard of that on the investing side. I'm going to invest in stocks and bonds. Now, we've already talked about early in this course about a company's stock means ownership, right? When it's over here, it means ownership. Stockholder equity, right? But folks, what I want you to understand is this. There are two sides to every transaction. Let's say I'm a corporation, okay? And I sell stock to owners, and you're the owners. What do I have? I have owners, right? I have equity, right? I got assets from you folks. You gave me some money, right? What do you have? You have an investment. You have an asset. The stock in your hands is an asset, right? It's an investment. You can sell it. You can earn dividends with your stock, right? But to me, it represents what? Ownership. You give me $5 million. What am I going to do with $5 million? You are now my owners, right? But really, you're investors, right? I'm Walmart. What am I going to do with that $5 million? I'm going to invest in property, plant, and equipment. Okay? I want to buy a new fleet of trucks. Okay? And what are bonds? Folks, bond is debt. If a company sells bonds to you, that company is borrowing money from you. A bond, if I'm the corporation and I issue bonds, I'm borrowing money from you. Let's say you all buy some of my bonds, okay? I'm borrowing money from you. So what do you think is going to happen if I borrow money from you? You hold a bond, I borrowed money, you gave me some money, I gave you my bond. What do you think is going to happen if I borrowed money from you ultimately? I got to pay it back, right? Plus what? Plus interest, right? Same concept. Now, if you buy my stock, do I have to pay you back? No. Do I have to pay you a dividend? No. But if you buy my bond, I have to pay you back and I have to pay you interest. That's the way it works. Now, but how does a bond differ from just a plain old notes payable? Folks, have you ever thought about this? Ever in your life thought about something like this? I see a skyscraper in New York City. Where in the world did they get the money to build that skyscraper? It only cost $1 billion. Where did they get the money? Have you ever thought about Delta Airlines? Where does it get the money to buy those jets? Those jets they are buying now cost $50 million a pop, if not more. Closer to $75 million each. You buy 12, you're pushing $1 billion, aren't you? How many jet airplanes do you think Delta's got? 12? Thousands. Where do they get the money to buy this stuff? Trot down to the local bank. Walk in and see the bank manager. Hey, I'd like to borrow $1 billion. Yeah, right. Not going to happen. First off, banks can't loan one party $1 billion. Now, there are probably a couple of banks that can. Most banks can't do it. And even if they could, they wouldn't, because it's putting too many eggs in one basket. You know, that company goes bankrupt, where are you? Bankrupt with them. So, folks, where do you get the money to build skyscrapers and buy fleets of jet airliners or super tankers? Where do you get the money to do that?
Investors.
You get it by selling bonds. Now, so what is a bond? It's a way to take a very large amount of borrowing and break it up into little bitty pieces. Now, the typical bond has a face value of $1,000. Now, who am I going to pick on? I got to pick on somebody. Joe. That's who I'm going to pick on. I walk up to Joe one day, and you don't have to do anything. You just have to stand there and look cool. There you go. I walk up to Joe one day and say, Joe, I need you to lend me $1 billion. He starts laughing at me. I don't like to be laughed at. I pull out my gun. This is America. We got to have a gun. Pull out my gun, and I point it at Joe, and I say, you think it's funny, do you? I need $1 billion. I'm going to shoot you dead. Well, what's going to happen to poor old Joe? Pretty much toast, right? Joe's not going to make it out of this one. He can't come up with $1 billion, can he? Let me change the scenario. Yeah, maybe he won the lottery yesterday, you know. Change the scenario. I walk up to Joe and I say, Joe, I need you to lend me $1,000. And I pull out my gun and I say, if you don't lend me $1,000, I'm going to kill you. Shoot you dead. Now, can Joe find $1,000? Some way Joe can get $1,000. He might not have $1,000 on him. He might not have $1,000 in the bank. But he might know somebody that could give him $1,000. I mean, his life's on the line here, right? He's got a car he might sell for $1,000, right? Hell, he could knock off a liquor store tonight and get $1,000, couldn't he? Now, let me stop. Don't anybody go out and knock off a liquor store tonight and tell the judge, I encourage you to do that, okay? I'm not suggesting you go knock off a liquor store, okay? I'm just kidding, all right? One of these days, that story's going to get me in big trouble. My point is this. If you had to, could you come up with $1,000? You could lend this company $1,000, couldn't you? That's how bonds work. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of investors all over the world will buy bonds to lend these companies the amount of money they need to buy these fleets of jet airliners and build these skyscrapers. That's how it works. Now, what kind of company could issue bonds? First off, you need to understand that most bonds have a life of 20, 30, or 40 years. You know how old you'll be in 40 years? Yeah. Again, we know where I'll be. Okay. Probably dead, but if not, in the home. In the home, yes. All right. So who would you lend $1,000 to for 20 years? Joe's Pool Hall and Canning Emporium down here on Dolly Parton Parkway? Think you'd lend Joe's Pool Hall and Canning Emporium $1,000? Probably not a dime, right? Much less for 20 years. Folks, what kinds of companies can issue bonds? Only large